ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow's voice trembled when she approached Alexis again. But it was not the trembling of weakness, it was the trembling of a woman whose desperation had curdled into calculation, whose fear had sharpened into something fierce and relentless. This time she was not asking for representation. She was not requesting advice. She was pleading, bargaining, forcing the universe to bend to her will as she clutched a secret so volatile it threatened to tear apart the thin moral boundary Alexis had left. The air between them thickened the moment Willow began speaking, her words soft but heavy. Dripping with the weight of everything, she refused to lose Wiley, Amelia, and the life she believed she was owed. Alexis had already sacrificed more than she ever intended. She had twisted her ethics, bent her principles, and sat in a courtroom defending a woman she knew was not innocent. That alone had left her with sleepless nights and an ache in her conscience that refused to quiet. But Willow knew exactly how to approach her now, by invoking Scout, by invoking gratitude, by invoking the fragile foundation of stability that Alexis had fought desperately to rebuild. And so Willow's plea became something darker. It became a request wrapped in emotional leverage. She insisted she could not bear being separated from Wiley and Amelia any longer. Insisted that Michael was manipulating the situation. Insisted that every hour she spent without them was an hour in which the family she dreamed of was slipping further, out of reach. Her eyes shone with sincerity. But Alexis sensed something else, simmering beneath the surface, a hunger for control disguised as maternal sorrow. Willow was not simply longing for her children. She was determined to reclaim dominance over a life that had spun out of her grasp the moment the courts intervened, the moment Michael asserted boundaries she did not approve of. The moment Jacinda entered the picture and threatened the fragile identity Willow clung to. Alexis listened, hands clasped tightly, heart racing, because the request Willow was building toward became clear with every whispered confession. Willow wanted Alexis to help her manipulate the legal system again. She wanted Alexis to push lines further, to stretch the truth harder, to find loopholes where none existed, to remake the narrative so completely that the judge would have no choice but to declare that Wiley and Amelia belonged under her roof and her rules. And though Willow never outright demanded unethical action, her implication hung in the air like smoke. Do what you did before, but do it bigger. Alexis felt the crushing weight of a decision she never wanted to make. She owed Willow nothing, yet she owed Scout everything. And because Scout's stability depended on Willow's cooperation, Alexis could feel the trap closing around her. The dilemma twisted inside her like a blade if she refused to help Willow. She risked shattering the delicate arrangement that allowed Scout to remain in her care. If she agreed, she would descend deeper into moral compromise, risking her career, her freedom, and the fragile respect she had spent years piecing back together. Willow sensed the hesitation and pressed harder. She spoke of being judged unfairly, of being isolated, of being treated as though she were undeserving of motherhood. She painted a picture of herself as a victim of circumstance, and Alexis, despite knowing the truth about Drew, despite knowing the dangerous impulses Willow carried, felt the familiar tug of empathy she could never quite silence. This was Willow's strength. She understood how to present her brokenness as innocence, her desperation as purity, her fear as righteousness. And now she wielded those traits like daggers, pushing Alexis into a corner she could not escape. As Willow spoke, Alexis began to see not just the plea, but the terrifying evolution of the woman in front of her. Willow's desire to regain Wiley and Amelia was no longer rooted in love. It had evolved into obsession. She needed to feel in control again, needed to restore a sense of identity that had been torn apart by guilt, lies, and courtrooms. She needed to win, not because it was just, but because any other outcome felt like annihilation. And Alexis, with her tangled loyalty and fragile conscience, had become the last tool Willow believed she could shape into a weapon. Alexis tried to explain the consequences, tried to remind Willow of the line they had already crossed, the ethical compromises that were already suffocating her. But Willow responded with trembling sincerity, insisting that this time it would be different, that this time they were doing the right thing, that a mother deserved her children no matter what mistakes she had made. And there, in that statement, Alexis felt the cold sting of truth. Willow believed her own narrative so completely that she could no longer distinguish justice from justification. The more Willow pleaded, the more Alexis felt her sense of self slipping. She looked at the woman across from her, the woman she had defended, the woman who had trusted her, the woman who held the key to Scout's happiness, and felt the claustrophobic tightening of moral entanglement. This was no longer about law. This was about power, about influence, about emotional leverage, and Willow was using every fragment of it. The decision Alexis faced was impossible. Help Willow and she risked destroying her own life. Refuse Willow and she risked destroying Scout's. That pressure cracked something deep inside her, forcing her into a mental negotiation with her own conscience. She knew she could not walk away clean, not anymore. The first compromise had already tainted her soul. Another would only deepen the stain. And yet, she also sensed that refusing Willow now might provoke something dangerous. Willow was unraveling, slipping into behaviors driven more by panic than reason. Denying her could push her toward unpredictable, destructive actions. Perhaps helping her just a little might keep the situation from spiraling into catastrophe. But even as Alexis attempted to justify her growing willingness to yield, she understood the truth. She could not speak aloud. This was not Willow's story alone anymore. This was a story of control, shifting hands, of power being wielded under the guise of maternal love, of a woman drowning in guilt, pulling others beneath the surface with her. Alexis felt herself bending, not breaking, but bending toward the compromise Willow needed. She hated it. She feared it. And yet she knew she would do it. Not for Willow, for Scout. And when Alexis finally whispered, "Tell me what you want me to do," the air in the room shifted into something irreversible. Willow exhaled with relief, a victory she did not bother to hide. And Alexis realized that she had just stepped into a new, darker Chapter 1, where every decision she made from this point forward would pull her deeper into Willow's chaos, deeper into moral corruption, and deeper into a fate she no longer had the strength to outrun. Willow had not just pleaded, she had conquered. And Alexis, bound by love and guilt, was powerless to refuse. Willow was running out of places to hide from the consequences she had created, and the realization pressed against her chest like a tightening fist. Every attempt to keep control of her life, of her children, of her carefully shaped image was slipping away faster than she could gather the pieces. The custody battle with Michael had spun into something she could no longer navigate alone, and the emotional manipulation she once used so effortlessly had begun to lose its power. She felt cornered, exposed, and unstable, and that was exactly why she clung to Alexis with a desperation that bordered on suffocation. Alexis had become the last barrier between Willow and complete collapse, the only person still willing or trapped enough to consider helping her. But leaning on Alexis came with a cost Willow had never imagined, because the more power she ceded, the more Alexis finally understood that she could ask for something in return. Something that would shift the balance of control entirely. Willow came to Alexis trembling with fear, pleading for guidance, insisting that everything depended on the next legal move. But Alexis no longer saw just a frightened mother. She saw a woman losing control of her impulses. A woman whose desperation was beginning to bleed into recklessness. And Alexis understood something Willow did not when a person in that state gains access to Wiley or Amelia. The damage could be irreversible. The more Willow begged, the clearer it became that she was clinging not to motherhood but to dominance. She wanted to win. She needed to win. And that need was becoming dangerous. So Alexis did what she had never allowed herself to do before she stepped into the position of authority. For years she had been guilt-ridden, morally conflicted, endlessly bending for others. But Willow's spiral forced her to see the truth if she didn't set conditions now. Willow's instability could destroy not only herself but the children around her. And so Alexis spoke the words that froze Willow where she stood. If Willow wanted Alexis's help, she would have to give Alexis full guardianship of Scout and Danny. The demand detonated between them like an explosion. Willow's breath hitched her face, draining of color, her mind racing to comprehend what Alexis had just taken hold of. Scout and Danny, two children Willow assumed would always remain under her moral influence, were suddenly no longer. Guaranteed. Alexis had turned the tables completely. For the first time, Willow felt what it was like to be on the weaker side of a power play. The horror in Willow's eyes widened as Alexis laid out her reasoning. Willow had already entrusted Scout to her during Drew's medical crisis. She had admitted she could not care for her daughter without drowning in panic. She had shown signs of emotional instability, paranoia, and manipulative behavior traits that in court could be devastating. Alexis knew Willow's secrets. She knew the lies Willow told. She knew the darker truth behind Drew's shooting. And whether Willow realized it or not, Alexis held the threads of her future custody battles in her hands. Willow stood there trembling, realizing that the woman she thought she could manipulate had quietly gained the upper hand. Alexis didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She didn't argue. She simply made it clear that if Willow wanted her help destroying Michael's custody claim, she would need to prove she was capable of surrendering control in the one place that mattered most, the children. Willow's mind spun. Giving guardianship to Alexis meant letting go of Scout and Danny, letting someone else shape their lives, letting someone else become their protector, letting someone else replace her in ways that terrified her. But refusing meant losing Wiley and Amelia forever. It meant losing Michael to the courts. It meant being exposed in a way she could not face. And for the first time, Willow felt real fear, not of losing a legal battle, but of losing the identity she had built as a mother. She felt herself shrinking, cornered by a woman she had underestimated. Alexis had become the gatekeeper to her entire future, and Willow could see clearly that Alexis no longer trusted her to protect any child, not even her own. Alexis watched her struggle, the conflict twisting through Willow's features. She did not relish the power, nor did she wield it carelessly. but she knew it was necessary. She had seen too much chaos, too many broken families, too many children damaged by the emotional storms of adults who refused to accept responsibility. She would not allow Scout or Danny to become casualties in Willow's unraveling. The ultimatum became a mirror Willow could not escape. She had to choose between her pride and her children, between maintaining control and surrendering it to someone who could actually provide stability. The panic built in her chest, rising with every breath. Until she felt she might choke on the reality Alexis had forced her to face, she was no longer the one holding power. She was the one being held accountable. Willow's voice cracked when she finally spoke, asking if there was any other way, any compromise, any loophole. But Alexis remained steady. She told Willow that this was the path forward, the only path that protected all 4 children, Wiley, Amelia, Scout, and Danny. Willow needed to prove she could relinquish something, prove she could accept guidance, prove she could be trusted again. The demand became the turning point of a much larger fracture, because if Willow agreed, she would lose control of Scout and Danny. If she refused, she would lose Wiley and Amelia. Either way, her world would shatter in ways she could not prevent. And as Willow stood trembling in the silence that followed, she realized the truth. Alexis had quietly known all along this was no longer a custody case. This was a reckoning that Willow herself had created, and one she could no longer manipulate her way out of. Alexis had always lived with the curse of a heart that reacted before her mind could intervene, a flaw that had shaped every triumph and every downfall of her life. She felt deeply, acted impulsively, and only afterward did the crushing weight of guilt settle over her like a suffocating fog. It was the same familiar pattern: emotion over logic, instinct over discipline, remorse over clarity, and now, as she stood tangled in Willow's chaos, that flaw threatened to destroy her completely. She could feel it happening again, that dangerous slide into a moral compromise she could not undo. This time, however, the stakes were far more lethal. Breaking the law to protect Willow had already crossed every boundary Alexis once promised herself she would never breach. It was one thing to bend rules for a client she believed deserved mercy. It was another to tamper with justice on behalf of a woman who was unraveling, manipulative, and growing more dangerous by the day. And yet Alexis had done exactly that. She had taken steps she could not explain away, knowing full well the consequences if the truth surfaced. But what haunted her even more was the knowledge that she was no longer the only one who knew. A select few had already begun to sense the irregularities, to piece together the strange inconsistencies surrounding Drew's shooting and the courtroom manipulation that followed. And if Willow ever learned that Alexis secretly knew she had fired the shot, everything would implode. The truth wouldn't just expose Willow, it would implicate Alexis as an accessory. It would brand her a fraud, a corrupt attorney, and a woman who once again allowed emotion to drag her into ruin. Diane could sense the danger long before Alexis was willing to face it. She warned her again and again to step back to let the justice system function as it was meant to prevent Willow's desperation from dragging her further into the abyss. But nothing Diane said seemed enough to change the trajectory. The situation had started sliding sideways, breaking apart piece by piece until even Diane got calm sharp. Controlled, Diane began to realize that they were entering territory where no one could protect Alexis anymore. The case was mutating into something volatile, something far beyond a custody dispute or a legal misstep. It had become a trap tightening invisibly around both Willow and Alexis. Every choice Alexis made to shield Willow was another thread binding them together. Another step toward mutual destruction. And the horrifying truth settled in: if Willow went down, Alexis would go with her. The thought consumed her, silent, creeping, inevitable. She could already picture the fallout. The bar would strip her license. The courts would prosecute her. Her name, her career, her reputation, everything she rebuilt after years of mistakes would disintegrate overnight. And the cruelest part of all was that she had done it knowing better. She had allowed herself to be manipulated by a woman she should have walked away from. Diane tried to intervene, urged her to cut ties, to salvage what little integrity she had left. But Alexis could feel that the machinery of disaster had already begun turning, grinding forward without mercy. No one was steering it anymore, not her, not Diane, not even Willow. It was simply happening. And Willow was spiraling in ways Alexis could not control. The more Willow's desperation grew, the more dangerous she became. She was unpredictable, erratic, and capable of tearing down anyone who stood between her and the custody victory she craved. If she felt cornered, if she sensed betrayal, she would lash out with a fury that could scorch everything in her path, including the one person still trying to protect her. Alexis was no longer just risking her career, she was risking her life as she knew it. And deep inside, she understood a terrifying truth. She and Willow were now tied together so tightly that the downfall of one meant the destruction of both. It wouldn't be Willow alone who faced the wreckage. It would be Alexis too dragged into the flames, consumed by the same darkness she had tried so desperately to keep at bay. And as the storm gathered, building into something catastrophic, one grim realization solidified. This was no longer a legal disaster. It was a shared annihilation, slow, inevitable, and utterly inescapable.